The theory that the Moors held the knowledge of the Americas, and this is how the Europeans gained this knowledge through the retaking of Spain in 1492. The question remains, where did the Moors get the knowledge from? Did the Moors have the knowledge by their own means, or was it passed down by another group? Last week we looked at the Mongols and the Cathi as potential torchbearers passing the information on to the Moors. This week I would like to dive into the idea that maybe the Africans were already making routine trips into the Americas. History isn't just what we've been told. Sometimes it's what we forgot to remember. Welcome back to In Search of Tontonteac. Africa, unlike what is currently taught, before European contact wasn't just isolated tribes. It was a continent filled with empires, kingdoms, universities, bustling trade routes, powerful navies, and advanced cities. A continent that was exploring the world, not isolated from it. While Europe was emerging from the Middle Ages, Africa was running global networks of gold, knowledge, and power. Mali Empire, which existed from 1235 to 1600s, was one of the wealthiest empires in world history. It was famous for its rulers like Mansa Musa, richest man ever, reportedly. His 1324 pilgrimage to Mecca claimed to literally crashed economies by giving away too much gold. Its capital city, Timbuktu, was a global center of learning. Universities, libraries with tens of thousands of manuscripts, astronomy, medicine, law, math, philosophy. Kingdom of Congo, which existed from 1390 to 1857, was the Central African powerhouse. Centralized government with a king, Manikongo, was mostly known for metalwork, weaving, artistry, international diplomacy. The Ethiopian Empire from Aksum to Solomonic dynasty, a Christian empire tracing roots back to King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba in their tradition, advanced stone architecture, coinage, early adoption of Christianity, long before Europe made it official. Great Zimbabwe from 1100 to 1450 was a massive stone city in southern Africa, known for its great enclosure, huge stone walls built without mortar. Swahili coast city-states of East Africa had Kilwa, Mombasa, Zanzibar, thriving port cities. Was a Muslim stronghold with sophisticated architecture and coral stone houses. Africa was in no way unknown or primitive before 1500s. It was wealthy, scholarly, and a powerful part of the world. In fact, Europeans wanted African gold, spices, and knowledge badly. That's why Portugal and Spain were pushing down the coast and into the Atlantic in the first place. It is said that the currents from West Africa, Senegal area, flow directly toward the Americas. It's actually easier to sail west from Africa than east to Europe. In Mexico, there are giant stone heads which have very African features, broad noses, full lips, and some researchers, especially Ivan van Sertima in They Came Before Columbus, argue that African navigators reached the Americas and influenced early cultures. Before 1492, Columbus had significant experience sailing around the west coast of Africa, especially working with the Portuguese. He spent time in places like, in the 1470s, Columbus sails with the Portuguese around the Madeira and Azores Islands, Atlantic stepping stones toward Africa. From 1482 to 1485, Columbus is believed to have visited Elmina, modern Ghana, or the Gold Coast region when Portugal was establishing trading posts there. He would have seen African maritime culture firsthand. Africans were sailing long distances, trading gold, ivory, and knowledge. From 1485 to 1488, Columbus lived in Lisbon, Portugal, the hub of global exploration. Here he would have heard stories from Arab African sailors about westward lands beyond the Atlantic. Cape Verde, off the coast of West Africa, very important. It was a Portuguese trading hub with heavy African contact, possibly as far south as the Gulf of Guinea area. He was learning about winds, currents, and African peoples during these trips. This experience is what helped him later predict that you could ride the trade winds west to land. That's why he aimed for the Caribbean. There are stories and some old letters suggesting that Columbus heard about lands to the west from African sailors or Arab African traders who told tales of huge lands across the ocean. Some historians even argue that Columbus was trying to follow old African or Arab knowledge when he set sail. In fact, Cape Verde was full of mixed African-European sailors, and it was known they talked about voyages west across the Atlantic. There are a few famous letters hinting that Columbus gained his knowledge about crossing the Atlantic from the Africans. Arab historians like Al-Umari, 1300s. They recorded that Mansa Abubakari Sekou, the emperor of Mali, supposedly launched a fleet of hundreds of ships to explore across the Atlantic, around 1311 AD. This is 180 years before Columbus. Columbus's own writings, Bartolomé de las Casas quotes him. Columbus said he heard reports of a great land to the west from people in the Portuguese Cape Verde Islands. These people were very close to African traders. Letter from Columbus to the King and Queen of Spain in 1498. In his third voyage journal, wrote in his journal that he encountered people in the Caribbean who resembled Africans. He specifically mentioned seeing black-skinned people in the areas of what's now Trinidad and parts of Central America. Some of these notes suggest he thought they might have come from Africa on currents. Some scholars believe he's hinting that Africans arrived in the Americas before him. Peter Martyr d'Anghiera, a Spanish historian writing in the early 1500s, decades of the New World, said that explorers in Central America, like along the coasts of Panama and Honduras, found people with black complexions. Leo Africanus in the early 1500s, a North African historian, wrote that people from Mali had crossed the Atlantic. He wrote that the king of Mali had sent boats west across the ocean, and some didn't come back, implying they reached land. Cabeza de Vaca, one of the survivors of the failed Narvaez expedition, 1520s to 1530s, described some groups he encountered in Texas and northern Mexico as having notably darker skin compared to others, though he didn't flat out say they were African. It is important to note that the way they described blackness back then didn't always perfectly match how we categorize race today, but some descriptions are very direct and not easy to explain just by sun exposure alone. Could the Ophir mines that Solomon sought gold from be in the Americas? If Ethiopia had already been a mighty empire back then, why wouldn't their navigators, or their allies, have crossed oceans and mined in distant land? In previous episodes, we discussed how various different Moors were used as interpreters for the indigenous people of these lands. Also, in previous episodes, we have discussed the idea that Egyptians may have had known about the Americas centuries before. This also ties back into the Olmecs and how the Egyptians and the Olmecs may have been an intercontinental nation. Could this also give us more basis for the idea of what was supposedly discovered in the Grand Canyon? Could this also give us our basis for the French and Spanish novels discussing Queen Khalifa, a black Moorish queen of the Amazonians living in an island state known as California? Maybe Queen Khalifa wasn't just a myth after all. Maybe the world we discovered was already mapped, traveled, and ruled by forgotten empires.